Good evening.
Evening, sir.
Yes, evening. We just a few minutes before we begin, because I usually wait until at least half the class is here before I begin.
Okay, sir.
In the meantime, I'm going to share a link in the chat that you can use to create your student account on Turnitin. The credentials are in the WhatsApp group. I just reshared it in the WhatsApp group that you need to create here. So please click on the link to add yourself to the Turnitin, to the assignment on. Right, so just use the link and add yourself to the assignment or to the class on Turnitin. The information, the class ID, as well as the enrollment keys in the WhatsApp group. And I think, Wayne, you're a part of the WhatsApp group?
No, sir.
Don't have been in this group. All right, what's your number? I'm going to tell him to add you. What's your number, Wayne?
802 4556.
4556.
Right.
Okay. And I hope you did go and watch the recording. Did
For
you
what?
get it? For the class. Remember, I told you to type in YouTube and you'll find my name.
I think I watched one recording
Okay. All right, I just wanted to
on
know
YouTube.
that,
On YouTube. Yeah, I
right.
watched the first one.
Right. And you're supposed to be looking at the comparative advantage today, right?
Right.
Okay. And after that, Christopher is supposed to be looking at the other ones. Okay. All right. So we're going to actually, once you register for the course on Turnitin, then we're going to go, you're going to do your presentation. Then everybody is going to present, and then I will do just to add some additional information, and then we do the tutorial presentation. All right. But just record. Let me just add the information to the WhatsApp group in the meantime, so that you can add yourself to the tutorial. So I'm going to put the class ID as well as the enrollment key. And everything is okay, Mario? Mario, everything is okay? All right, give me 1 sec. I'm going to log out and log back in, okay? One sec, guys. Give me 1 sec. All right, my apologies about the delay. I had to deal with something quickly. Evening, everybody. Good evening.
Evening, sir.
Evening, sir.
Yes, for a second time, I was in the class before, but I had an emergency. All right. I think I had indicated to, was it? Let me just, I actually have the record. Wayne, was it you that is supposed to start us off in terms of wrapping up the presentations?
Yes, sir.
All right, go ahead for me.
Okay. Good evening, everyone. I am presenting on comparative advantage. Comparative advantage can be defined as the economy's ability to produce a specific good or service at a lower opportunity cost than its trading partner. The theory of comparative advantage was largely associated with the 19th century economist David Ricardo. He wrote a book on principles of political economy and taxation. That was in 1817. In some quarters, people would say that his mentor, James Mill, it really originated the idea or the analysis. The theory suggests that all actors can benefit from cooperation and voluntary trade. So I am going to share a video that should help to explain.
We're not hearing the video. You have to turn on the mute. You have to check the audio box on. So stop sharing. And let me tell you how to do it. So stop sharing.
Sharing.
Because we're not hearing, but you didn't check on the checker box. So stop sharing. So when you go on the share button, before you do any, when you click on share, look to your bottom left, you're going to see share sound. You must check the box.
Okay.
Right, and then you share. Okay, so we can hear the audio.
All right.
Yes, and our presenters, while he's doing that, our presenters today are Jerome Parnell and Shanique Samuels. All right, and then Rachel and Ramon. I hope you have my paper because I'm going to show you how to upload to Turnitin. Because remember, please remember that your presentation, but the paper version is graded. Very, very important. It's part of the coursework grade. All right, go ahead, Wayne.
Oh, sorry, sir. Wrong video. Okay, stop sharing.
DC Econ. Today I'm in Hong Kong, China to talk to you about international trade and comparative advantage. Everybody trades, and I'm not just talking about countries, I'm talking about everyone. When one person becomes a dentist, they trade their services to the person who's the lawyer. Since people don't have the time to learn how to do everything, and they have different abilities, they specialize in one thing and trade with other people for the thing that they need. And it's the same way for countries. In fact, Hong Kong is the international hub for finance and trade in all of Asia. It also has the 5th largest skyscraper in the world, the International Commerce Center. Let's look at a made-up scenario to show you why and how countries trade. Let's use the United States and China. And let's assume they can produce only 2 goods, planes and toys. Now, before we go any further, keep in mind that it doesn't really look like this in real life. Countries produce more than just 2 goods, but we simplify the world in economics, and then we bring in the complexities later on. Anyway, in our situation, let's just say the United States can produce 10,000 planes or 30,000 toys, and China can produce 4,000 planes or 20,000 toys. It's easy to organize this by drawing a grid, with the countries on the left and the things they can produce on the top. Notice the United States can produce more of both planes and toys. This is called having an absolute advantage. But this doesn't mean that the United States should produce both planes and toys. Both the United States and China should specialize in producing one and then trade with the other country. But how should they trade? That guy just walked right through here. Oh, that's funny. To determine what they should produce, we have to calculate something called per unit opportunity cost. Okay, we know the United States gives up 30 toys when they produce 10 planes, but how many toys are given up when they produce just 1 plane? That's the per unit opportunity cost. The number of units you'd lose divided by the number of units you gain. So, for the United States, 1 plane costs 3 toys, and each 1 toy costs 1/3 of a plane. How many toys does China give up when they produce 1 plane? For China, 1 plane costs 5 toys. Now, how many planes do they give up when they produce 1 toy? The answer is 1/5 of a plane. So which country should specialize in producing planes? The one that gives up 3 toys for each plane, or the one that gives up 5 toys for each plane? Well, the US, because they have a lower opportunity cost and therefore a comparative advantage. China has a comparative advantage in the production of toys. So if these 2 countries specialize in trade, they'll actually be better off than if they try to produce the products themselves. And that's the whole reason why we learned the concept of comparative advantage. Hey, thank you guys. Thank you. Thank you. Autograph? Okay. Let's look at the concept of terms of trade. We know both countries can benefit.
We're still listening, Wayne.
Yes, sir. Coming. So, in my view, this theory is a prescriptive theory, as it prescribes to each country what they should or what is best, or product or service, good or service that they should produce, and because of the comparative advantage. One such example, I could say that Ireland produces, have dairy farming and beef, and are big exporters of this. But the individual farmers, oh, hold on, I'm mixing up this, yeah. So they are dairy farmers. They have surplus of cows and dairy, and China has electronics. So Ireland would produce a dairy because of the lower cost, opportunity cost to and export to China, which if China was to do that, it would not. See if I'm explaining. Yeah. Comparatively, it would be at a lower cost producing for Ireland dairy, and China it would be at a lower cost of producing electronics. But they both trade. So China send electronics to Ireland, which in turn Ireland sends dairy products to China. In China, dairy products would be cheaper to import. And
so Wayne, just to stop you there, you have to be careful when you don't have a graphic for persons to be looking at, because when you're making an example, people are not going to be able to follow the dairy
explanation.
and the explanation. What the other part I'd asked you to originally look at is the strengths and weaknesses of the theory. So I think you can go to that, providing that you have that information.
Okay. So the obvious strength of this theory is that you would be producing each country, each country or economy would be producing, maximizing the resources at the lowest cost to produce. The drawback to that is that we are assuming that everything is equal, and so things like what you call it, transportation cost is not factored in. Transportation costs can vary, and it's not necessarily the same in each country. So I think that's as much as I had.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm going to go through all the theories roughly. But as it says comparative advantage, we are comparing trading of one good, how one country can trade a particular good or service versus another country, and who should actually specialize. So both the absolute and the comparative theory speaks to specialization. That's really, and you rightly say, as you rightly say, Wayne, it is a prescriptive theory, because what it is really doing is advising or recommending to countries the best way to trade with other countries. All right, so you're very correct in that regard. In that regard, and what they're also, the theory speaks a lot to about opportunity costs. In other words, in some instances, it is better for, even if a country has an absolute advantage in producing two goods that another country also produces, if it's going to take more resources or labor to produce that good versus the other product, then it makes sense to just allow the other country to produce it, and you specialize in the one that you have a better advantage. All right, but I'm going to speak to all of that. The other person who should speak today, and we're going to, I know that we have our presentation at 6:30. I'm just looking at because I took a picture of who. Christopher Johnson. I'm not seeing Christopher in the class. Jerome Parnell. Mr. Parnell, which theory you were supposed to present on? It would have been the international product life cycle.
Yes, sir.
Right. All right, go ahead for me, sir.
My time?
Yes.
Give me a second, sir. Everybody has the screen?
Yes, we are seeing the screen and try to speak standard English as best as possible, all right?
All right, sir, cool. All right, so good day, class. I will start with giving you guys a little bit of information on international product life cycle, right? So my name is Jerome Pardo. Let's go up on the slideshow version of this. All right. All right. So what is this theory about? So basically, the product life cycle is the time in which a product enters the market and how long it stays on the market until it leaves the market, right? This theory was introduced by Raymond Vernon in 1966 and is still widely used. In my opinion, this theory is a prescriptive one, right? So the product life cycle has 5 stages. The first stage is the development stage, right? What this stage deals with is so this is the first stage, right? Everybody follow me?
We're hearing you, sir. We're following you. Go ahead, sir.
Okay. All right. So for the first stage, the product is not published as yet, right? The cost to push the product to the market is very high. There's not any revenue as yet, and the business is basically incurring a loss in the developmental stage, right? The second stage now is the introduction stage. So as it states, introduction, you know, that is when the product is reaching to the point where they're gonna advertise and all of those stuff, right? So they gain market shares and large expenditures. The third stage is a growth.
Mr. Parnell, you're making an error.
Yes, sir.
You see what you're talking about, the product life cycle, you're talking about a product in the context of marketing. What we are talking about product life cycle in the context of international trade. So that's why it is called international product life cycle. So what you're talking about are the stages involved in international trade. What you are talking about is the marketing and the development of a product from inception to when it enters the market until it becomes obsolete, or when it enters various stages, such as the mature stage, where it has reached its optimum in the marketplace, and then suddenly it declines unless the marketers or the company add some kind of value or make some kind of change to it. So they might change the flavor, they might change the color, they might change the packaging, they might add something else, they might make additional flavors. But in terms of the international product life cycle, we are talking about international trade, and that speaks to the stages of international trade from inception to the point where trade no longer exists. So I thought you were going to give us some kind of background information, first of all, relating to international trade in terms of product life cycle, where they're kind of talking about a satellite, a core and a satellite, in the sense that the product, it talks about economic development beginning in advanced countries and then moving away from advanced countries into developing countries or less advanced countries. So I'm going to give you an opportunity to go and do some additional digging and come back in terms of international product life cycle as a trade theory. All right, so the two are not the same. It's an honest error to make, and this is why I think I shared something. Have you looked at what I've shared on Canvas? Did you look at Canvas?
No.
Yes, you have to look at Canvas. Remember, I told you that I constantly add information there for you. I was trying to get a digital copy of a textbook that you guys can use or refer to. I actually have one on my, they call this digital thing. Let me just remind, I always keep forgetting the name, but I actually have rented the book because it's so ridiculously expensive on my Kindle, called International Business. So what you need to do is I'm going to try and find a book, but you can also search. So there are two different things, product life cycle within the context of marketing, and product life cycle, international product life cycle in the context of international trade. They are not synonymous. All right, but thanks for the effort, Jerome. On Monday, you should come ready for us again. All right. Sir Jerome?
Yes, sir.
Okay, all right. And I'm still not seeing Christopher for him to present. All right. And it is important, people, that you engage with the material. I can't come and just give you information. It is important that you engage with material on your own. All right. So I'm going to start the discussion. At least I started the discussion by talking about what is a theory. What did we say is a theory again? Can anybody remind me, what did we say is a theory? What's a theory again? And next week is I'm going to speak about it. Next week is your mid-semester. You're getting 20 multiple choice questions, and we are at up to unit 4. So up to unit 4 on the course outline, you're going to get 20 multiple choice questions. What I'll try to do, 4, 5, 20. So you're going to get 5 questions per unit for the most part. I'll try to make it.
Sir, which day is that, sir?
It's going to be Monday because I have you at 7. So your exam will be Monday. Let me just put it in. So please put it in your calendar. It's going to be Monday. Let me just enter it on my phone as well so that I can remember. So mid-semester. International mid-semester, international business. So it's going to be Monday. No, that's not the right time. In other words, by that time, everybody should be at class, and you're not getting 2 hours. You're going to get 1 hour. 20 multiple choice, 1 hour. We're going to use the first hour to kind of do some amount of, we have to continue with the syllabus, and then in the second hour, you do the multiple choice, and you will get your grade instantaneously. The system that we're going to use, I'm going to put it on Canvas, or I can use Google Forms to do it, and you get your grade instantaneously. All right. So 20 multiple choice questions, and I will not be setting another multiple choice question, another mid-semester exam. All right. So please don't tell me that you miss it and the cow jump over the moon and all of that. Honestly, that's not going to work. It's very difficult to actually set a multiple choice paper, much less to go and write 2. All right. So yes.
Sir, quick question, sir. You said that we'll have 1 hour to do it, right?
Yes.
Is it any hour within the class time?
No, it's going to be the second hour of the class time.
Oh, the second hour. Okay, that's good, because I don't finish work until 8. So
yes, so you'll get an opportunity to do it the second hour, and I deliberately set it that way. And can you hand over host to me too, Maria? Thanks. I deliberately set it that way because I know you guys are working.
okay.
All right. Yeah. Any question about the mid-semester, or everybody is good? Please spread the good news that mid-semester is on Monday. All right, so that persons can be here at class. So I mentioned about theory, and one of the things that I said to you, that theory is really an assumption or a speculation that came out of original research that really describe or prescribe how the world is or how the world should be. All right, and I'm happy that for the persons who were presented earlier, they were using the terms prescriptive or descriptive. I'm happy for that, because that is really what the theory is doing. The theory is just really explaining international trade, sometimes in historical moments and in contemporary moments. I hear people mentioning, for example, that the theorists, the traders, were being guided by this. Most times traders are not being guided by that. They are being guided by government policies and international regulations. But these international regulations and our laws at the moment are informed by certain kind of theoretical underpinning or theory, which is what we are discussing. The first theory that we, oh yes, and we also mentioned this theories of international relations. And I mentioned to you that liberalism or neocapitalism is the theory that really guided international trade, especially after World War II, which led to free market capitalism and the rise of things like the World Trade Organization, the World Bank, led to economic integration, especially in parts of Europe, and even in the Caribbean after World War II, and the let me call them master colonies realized that it was no longer in their interest to have colonies in the Caribbean and across the world. All right. So the first theory that and then we looked at the evolution of international theories, and what came out of that in terms of the evolution of theory. We spoke about the first one being mercantilism, and that was describing a period of time. Then we spoke about absolute advantage. Then we went to Ricardo's theory of comparative advantage and Porter's cluster theory, which was not discussed. Christopher Johnson is not here. Then international product life cycle, and then you have Exco-Ollin factor endowments theory, as well as Porter's diamond theory and trade theory and business. So today I'm going to continue the discussion about the theory, starting at the beginning to ensure that persons properly understand what these theories are saying. So the first theory I'm going to discuss, or I'm going to share an audio about, is mercantilism. Let me just share my screen. Please remember, these things you're presenting on them as well as they're coming on your mid-semester exam. All right?
Okay, so what's the main?
So let me just restart and share screen. This is mercantilism. This is the first trade theory.
Hello, and welcome to this
Please
first
make
in a
notes.
series of short videos looking at trade theories. We'll start with mercantilism, as it's the oldest trade theory. Okay, so what's the main idea? Well, back in the 1500s and 1600s, people equated wealth with gold and silver. Well, that was the currency at the time, so you can understand why they did that. So what were you to do if you didn't have gold and silver that you could extract from your country? Well, there was war and piracy, but that's generally not such a good idea. The other thing to do was to trade, so you would get goods and you would sell those to foreign countries. This exports would lead to gold and silver, which would increase wealth. On the other hand, imports decreased wealth because you were sending gold and silver outside of the country. The idea was summed up by Thomas Mann, and I'll quote here. Open quote. "The ordinary means, therefore, to increase our wealth and treasure is by foreign trade, wherein we must ever observe the rule, to sell more to strangers yearly than we consume of theirs in value." Close quote. Okay, let's have a little critique of why this might be a problem. In the 1700s, the philosopher David Hume summed it up quite nicely. He asked us to imagine England and France trading, with England starting off being the country that did the exporting, the manufacture of the goods and exporting. France would import the goods and in turn export gold and silver, money. But there are some problems with this. Let's have a look at the first outcomes of this situation. Let's imagine that, again, that only England is doing the exporting, or the vast majority of the exporting. In return for its exports, it gets gold and silver. This increases the money supply. Now, what happens when money supply increases? You get inflation, especially if it increases much faster than the rate of growth of the economy.
Which is what is happening in the United States now.
And in the end, this will lead to higher production costs and higher prices. The costs of the goods may be so expensive that the French can no longer afford to buy things, and therefore there won't be any exports from England anyway. Let's have a look at the first outcomes from France. In France, because they're exporting their money supply will decrease. This will have the opposite effect to what happened in England, and we will see deflation. And again, the opposite effect from England. This will lower French production costs because the inputs cost less money, the labour, and all the other things. And so French goods will be cheaper. So two things will have happened. France will have run out of money because it's been exported to England, so they can't afford English goods. And at the same time, their costs will have reduced to such a level where they will be cheaper than the English goods for the English. So we move on to the second outcomes. Now France becomes the exporting nation, exporting.
All right. Another thing that I want you to make mention of in terms of mercantilism. So one is, and I think I said it before, that you have to think about mercantilism within the context of colonization, where Europeans went on their voyages, quote unquote, to discover the new world, and that led to the acquisition of lands in continental Africa, Asia, and the Americas. And this led to the colonization of the Caribbean region and of the Americas in terms of the United States, Canada, and even the Caribbean is kind of considered a part of the Americas. And what was driving international, quote unquote, international trade at the time was the maximization of exports, the acquisition of wealth through what they call very restrictive policies. In other words, countries were interested, or European countries were more interested in maximizing exports and minimizing the number of imports in their country, because they thought, and this is a flawed reasoning, they thought that the world's resources were limited. All right. Another thing that I want you to think about with mercantilism is the fact that there are three pillars of mercantilism: trade surpluses, government intervention, and colonialism. So when it comes on to trade surpluses, this is really exports value. And I think I said this before, that you're ensuring that the value of exports is way more than the value of imports in terms of dollars and cents, or in terms of wealth. The second one, in terms of government intervention, many of the voyages that were done by the Europeans were actually done on behalf of the monarch. Remember, at that point in time, there were kings and queens and so forth. So what happened is that there was the banning of certain imports, or imposing tariffs and quotas especially in the European countries. In other words, they had very restrictive international trade policies when it comes on to imports, but they wanted, of course, to export as much as they could. And they also did something that is still present now, subsidizing their home-based industries. And subsidizing means that the government intervenes in the marketplace by providing incentives to specific producers of goods and services. For example, they might give them a tax break, or they might actually give them a loan at a very 0% interest rate and so forth. I'm sure some of you would be familiar with that. And at that time too, there was the ban, they really banned the export of gold and silver, because that spoke to wealth. The other thing that I wanted to think about in the context of colonialism now is the acquisition of territories, and we call them colonies around the world. And I've heard this before, and you can tell me if you think this is actually true or false, that enslavement of Africans was not actually based on race, but it was really based on economics. It's not a matter that they said, okay, I'm going to enslave Black people. They wanted a group of people to produce their goods at the lowest cost, and they found that in continental Africa. As I'm saying, I'm not saying that I endorse that view, but that's a part of the discussion when it comes on to discussions about enslavement. And partly why they wanted the colonies is because the colonies had what are considered sources of inexpensive raw materials. So we had banana. There are several things that were raw materials that were later incorporated into the production of goods and services by the colonial countries. So they incorporated what they got, the raw materials from the Caribbean, into their products, and then sell back these raw materials to the colonies and to other countries. Make sense, people? I just want to know that you understand.
Yes, sir. Man. Get me out, someone.
Yes.
You can follow the line of reasoning, sir.
So, to tell you the truth, sir, I think because them maybe must say them people them not have enough wealth as them, and true because they know so they work for the gold and silver with them have. So I guess that's why I just as why they are trying to explain.
Right. And then the thing too, slavery, remember, slavery did not started with this transatlantic slave trade. You know, slavery happened, slavery was always a thing, but the definition of what constituted slavery was different. So if you were my servant, if you read even the Bible, and I'm not Christian or religious, but if you read the Bible, the definition of a slave in the Bible is not the definition of what happened during the transatlantic slave trade where people were killed and brutalized. It's a different, it's just, it meant servants. So it could be that historians have really quibbled over this, that they said to, so remember, first of all, Africans who were sold into enslavement were sold by other Africans. It wasn't white people who sold black people to other white people. It was black Africans who sold one set of, they called them tribes at the time, where I capture your tribe. Anybody has ever watched Apocalypto? You should watch that movie and you kind of understand mercantilism. And you saw at the end of the movie, you saw the arrival of what I would call the merchants, which speaks to the whole notion of mercantilism. So in Apocalypto, you saw where one tribe that was far more civilized and advanced captured another tribe and literally turned them into what? Slaves. So it was a similar thing that happened in terms of continental Africa. Most of the Africans came from East Africa or from West Africa, like Ghana and those countries. This is why even a country such as Ethiopia never experienced enslavement. But another thing that I want you to make mention of when you're talking about trade theories, especially in an academic paper or even on the final exam, is that you must mention the strengths and weaknesses of the theory. So one of the major flaws of the theory of mercantilism is that they thought that the wealth of the world's wealth was limited and that a nation could increase its share of the pie only at the expense of other countries.
So
all right.
Could you go again with that?
So I'm saying, so one of the major flaws of mercantilism is that they believe that the world's resources were limited. And as a result, they felt that they need to maximize their wealth via these resources. So they were like, I'm not going to trade with you, and I'm going to acquire these particular territories to get their resources to amass wealth in my home country. All right. And also they believed another flaw in the theory is that they really ended up robbing the colonies of their resources, and then at the same time restricted international trade, even though they were trading with other countries, even selling it back to the colonies at a much higher price. And when I say selling back to the colonies, they were not selling slaves. They were selling other persons who were living in the region. Some were called expatriates, and some of them would come here and do all kinds of things. And so if you read history, this is how cricket and all those kinds of even sports came to the Caribbean. Cricket was a pastime for the British. It's really a British kind of thing. And how we know what cricket match, and we come with the pot covers and everything and make prayer nice at the people that match. It wasn't like that. It was a very gentleman's sport where you just sit, watch, and you don't make any noise. It was a very quiet church-like kind of thing. All right, so that in and of itself is sort of a nutshell of mercantilism. And I'm watching the time. Let me get a little now into the other theory that came right after. The theory that came after now is absolute advantage. And before I do any explanation, I'm going to play two videos that will help you to sort of understand absolute advantage. And let me just check on one thing to ensure. Where did I do it? All right, so let me just check here. Open recent. All right, so Jerome, you're ready for your presentation as well as Shanique Samuels, right? Jerome and Shanique? I'm waiting for a verbal response.
Yes, sir.
Okay, just checking. So I'm watching the time. I just want to get into the other theory, and then we wrap up the theories next week and go into another topic. So the other theory now that I mentioned was absolute advantage. And I did say that I'm going to play a recording Let me just ask a quick question. Rachel and Ramon, you have your actual paper. Do you have the written paper for me? Because it's today's due, you know. And I did indicate that your paper is due 1 week after the verbal presentation. I'm waiting for a verbal response. Rachel and Ramon?
Mr. Clark, yes, you did indicate that it's due 1 week after the presentation.
And you have the paper?
Yeah, it's on my laptop. I just need to go get it at work. Okay, I forgot.
All right, so what you're going to do, you're going to send me, I don't want you to upload yet. Let me look at the paper first before you upload. So email the paper to me so I can go through it and look at it, make some recommendations, and I'll give you until Friday to do the final upload for both of you, okay?
Yes, sir.
Okay, all right, cool, no problems. All right, so let's just quickly go through absolute advantage, and then we allow the persons to present. Absolute advantage, okay. Let me just share my screen.
To believe that the leader you look outwardly for.
An absolute advantage can produce something at lower cost than another country can. That country requires fewer resources to produce the same number of goods as the other country does. Tropical Panama can produce bananas much more cheaply than Finland can. Finland would need expensive greenhouses and costly heating. Panama has an absolute advantage over Finland regarding banana production. We use the term absolute advantage for economies as well as companies and individuals. If I say that John has an absolute advantage over Simon regarding carrying goods, what does it mean? It means John is much stronger and fitter than Simon. John can move the same amount of stuff at lower cost.
All right, so that's just an
What's the
introduction
difference
to
between
absolute
comparative
advantage. The other, and it's somewhat self-explanatory, but let me just give you some broader context of absolute advantage. Sharing screen again, and then I'll kind of.
Trade Unit 2.
All right, let me just.
Welcome. Today we are going to see International Trade Unit 2, Adam Smith Absolute Advantage Theory. Myself, Dr. Santosh, Faculty Department of Economics, KCS Kasinadar College of Arts and Science. Let's see, students. Adam Smith, classical economist who formulated absolute differences in cost theory or absolute advantage theory. He is professor of moral philosophy at Glasgow University and considered as father of economics.
All right, and so the thing that I wanted to take away, and some of the points are actually here, is that it speaks to the advantage one country has over another in the areas of division of labor or in the areas of labor and specialization. All right, and I did make mention of the fact that for absolute and comparative advantage theories, they're really speaking to specialization. And the assumption is that they really talk about, they really compare two countries trading, but of course that's not how the natural world, or that's not how international trade actually takes place in the real world, because countries have all sorts of resources. But what they're saying is that if a country can produce a particular good and or service at a lower cost in the area of especially in terms of labor, then that country has an absolute advantage. All right, and this says it when one nation is more efficient than another in the production of one commodity, but is less efficient than the other nation in producing a second commodity, then both nations can gain by each specializing in the production. So if it is that Jamaica is better at producing banana versus the United States that is better at producing apples, then Jamaica should focus on bananas and the US should focus on apples, because they are more efficient in these respective areas in relation to international trade. This says the process helps utilizing resources in a more efficient way, and the output of both products will rise. So it will increase production and efficiency over time. All right. And of course, he makes mention of the quote unquote founding father of the theory being Adam Smith.
And the theory came out in the late 1700s. And again, I repeat the notion that the part of what the theory is saying and recommending is that countries should and should concentrate on producing goods that they have an advantage in producing, and that the theory speaks of specialization in international trade and actually welcomes international trade. And it also makes mentions of the fact that workers are more productive when they specialize. All right, and I won't go any further in relation to absolute advantage because that's really the theory in a nutshell. There are some particular strengths and weaknesses, but I don't want the time to necessarily run out before we get to the presenters. All right, so I'm going to allow the presenters to go first, and then if time allows, I'll pick up from there. Any question? Do you understand mercantilism and absolute advantage? These theories are really not very difficult to understand. They're not difficult to understand, the first two especially. All right, so at this point in time, I'm going to ask, I think it's Jerome and Shanique to take over. The question they're answering is, examine the role international bodies play in international trade. Over to you, presenters. I'm not hearing anything from the presenters. What's happening?
Sir, give me a minute, please. I just got home.
What about the other person? And please listen, and I have questions for them as well.
Good day, everyone. All right, so today we have a presentation on international business, the importance of international organizations. The two presentators today are Shanique Samuels and Jerome Poirier. Before I go along with the presentation, I have a scenario I'd like to share with you guys to just show the importance of international organizations and hold on. Yeah, so I'm gonna share the scenario. All right, so imagine now, right? You take a flight to one of the big name countries, let's say Uncle Sam, right? You reach to the Americas, you step off the plane, right? The first thing you do is check your phone. Make your way to clearing customs and leave the airport. With just boarding the plane and arriving at your destination, you have already went through about 5 international organizations. All right. So the first one would have been IATA, the second one ICAO, third one ITU, and the fourth one WCO. So that's 4. I said 5 earlier. Let's just leave it at 4. So the first one, they're gonna give you, tell you what the abbreviation stands for now. So the first one is the International Air Transport Association. The second one is International Civil Aviation Organization. The third one is Telecommunication Union. And the fourth one is World Customs Organization. So if you realize that's 4 international organizations in which we have dealt with just traveling, right? So imagine now you're traveling back to Jamaica. What international organizations do you think you would have passed through coming back to Jamaica? Would anyone tell us? Hello? Anybody? If it's even one?
Same organizations.
Who was that? So like Mr. Grasset. All right, thanks, Sir Grasset. So it's the same organizations, right? Same organization, but traveling back, those organizations would now have to collaborate with some of the local organizations like Jamaica Customs would have to collaborate with the World Customs Organization. All right, so now we can move on to the presentation itself. All right, so what is an international organization? All right, so basically an international organization can also be defined as the way in which countries and their representatives come together to work out problems. That's a simple definition, right? Hold on. Before we move on, I want to give a next definition. All right. So most of the international organizations, though, were formed after World War in the 19th century, right? These organizations were created to help with regulating of international agenda, right? International organizations are formed by way of treaty. Understand, a treaty is a formal or legal binding written agreement between actors in international law, right? So basically, the sovereign states and the international organizations are usually the ones that enter into these agreements, right? So when you talk about the big nations, those are the ones that normally enter into these agreements to regulate international agenda, right? All right, so we're gonna move on now. All right, so the WTO, anybody can tell me what that stands for? Come in, people. Now with smartphones. Somebody tell me
World
what is
Trade
the WTO?
Organization.
All right, respect. So the World Trade Organization, after the Second World War, the WTO, right? And as I say, January 1st, 1995. And it was a big reform for the international trade. Right? All right, so move on to the types of international organizations. So we have 2 types here. So we have the international governmental organizations and international non-governmental organizations, right? IGOs and NGOs or INGOs. That's the abbreviations for the 2 respectively. All right, so we're gonna look at 2 international organizations. So the World Trade Organization and the World Bank. These are 2 of the more important IGOs when it comes to globalization and international organization, right? I already give a definition of the WTO.
The World Trade
This is a
Organization
video
is the
on the World Trade Organization. It should bring you guys up to speed or up to par, or give you guys a better understanding of it, because maybe what I had said earlier was not clear enough. So we're gonna watch this video, and at the end of it, you can probably ask.
The World Trade Organization is the entity which regulates international trade since January the 1st, 1995. The main goal of the WTO is creating a level playing field
Jerome?
2. Whenever disputes arise, the WTO tries to resolve them.
Yes, sir.
Because you paused, I was wondering if you had not logged out or something. Continue. Continue.
Oh.
Through negotiations. 3. If necessary, the organization can even impose sanctions on countries which break the rules. All of this might sound great, but like any other organization out there, the WTO also received criticism because 1. Some citizens believe letting the WTO create rules that their country has to follow is undemocratic. 2. In certain cases, the WTO risks hurting people to protect business interests. For example, poor countries that can't afford expensive patented medicine, such as HIV drugs, had to wait until patents expired before producing or buying cheaper generic versions. Eventually, the WTO enabled them to bypass patent regulations during national emergency situations. 3. In other cases, the WTO ends up being accused by businesses. For example, by pharmaceutical companies which complain that if countries declare a national emergency to bypass patent regulations for more and more drugs, they cannot recover the money they invested to innovate and create these drugs, and as such, research and innovation are discouraged. As can be seen, the job of the WTO is anything but easy, and therefore, controversy will always surround this organization.
All right. All right, so that video was just some more information of what the World Trade Organization is and what they deal with. Is there any questions at this point? Questions about the video? So I guess everyone understands. All right, so the functions of the WTO, World Trade Organization, is to ensure that trade flows are smoothly
Is it me or am I not, we're not hearing him?
Sometimes it's like it's a chip out.
Right. All right. So you're just coming back, Jerome. So you mentioned functions of WTO. Just start from there. Are you talking, Jerome? We're not hearing you.
Hold on a second. Give me a second. I'm gonna just try to fix that problem there. All right, sorry about that. All right, so the functions of the WTO, right, is to ensure that trade flows are smoothly and or some error that you're saying. But basically, the function of the WTO is for trade flows to be done smoothly as possible. They review national trade policies, monitor tariff reductions and non-tariff measures. Some other functions would include trade monitoring, dispute settlement, trade negotiations, and providing global trade rules. All right, so the World Bank. The World Bank is an international institution.
Rodney Trader, want me help you?
Oh, you can jump in if you're ready. Jay said he just reach home whenever they just have to do the presentation. But you can start here.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Shanique.
Okay.
All right, just continue sharing. What is the World Bank? The World Bank is an international financial institute that assists countries through providing loans that will help them to improve their living and combat poverty. That's the definition that we got for the World Bank. Next.
The International
All right, so I share a next video on the World Bank. So this time, this video is about the World Bank.
The International Monetary Fund and the World Bank have been founded, just like the United Nations after World War II. Why? Mainly because after the war, everyone wanted peace. However, peace on an empty stomach is hard to maintain. So these two institutions were meant to help the economic stability of the world. Both of them are basically banks, but instead of being started by individuals, like regular banks, they've been started by countries. Most of the world's countries are members of the two institutions, but of course, the richest countries are those who handled most of the financing, and ultimately, those who have the greatest influence. The IMF and the World Bank were designed to complement each other. The IMF's main goal is helping countries which are currently in trouble, and who cannot get money by other means. Perhaps their economy collapsed, perhaps their currency is in danger. The IMF, in these cases, is kind of like a lender of last resort, who you go to when nobody else is willing to give you money. The World Bank, in comparison, has a more long-term approach. Its main goals revolve around the eradication of poverty, and it funds specific projects which help them reach these goals, especially in poor countries. Unfortunately, the reputation of these institutions has been dwindling, mainly due to practices such as lending to corrupt governments, or even dictators, and imposing ineffective austerity measures to get their money back. If run properly, however, they definitely could help make the world a better place.
All right, so that was our next informative video. All right, so we're just gonna move on now.
All right, here's a brief information on the World Bank. It stated that it was created in 1944. I'm not seeing anything. Not seeing. On my laptop or what?
Everybody else see?
I'm seeing the screen.
Yeah, I'm seeing it.
See if you log out and log back in there, Shanique. All right, so in the meantime, the World Bank was created in 1944 out of Bretton Woods Agreement, right? The World Trade Headquarters is in USA, Washington, D.C., right? With the world, they also have another 184 member countries and shareholders, right? And I think they have locations in about another 130 countries. Just to name a few, I think China and don't remember the next name. Yeah. All right, so let us move on now. All right, so the World Bank is basically an institution that provides technical assistance and policy advice and supervises on the behalf of international creditors. The implementation of free market reforms. All right, so we have 5 main shareholders right now. United Kingdom, France, Germany, Japan, and the United States. All right, why was the World Bank established? It was established to develop, to help less developed countries to raise about their standards of living. So basically, the World Bank was created to lessen poverty in some poor countries, right? So they go around and fund the less fortunate countries with economic growth projects, right? Oh, here it is. All right, so the role of the World Bank is to provide low interest loans, interest-free credit, and grant developing countries for various reasons, right? And they have a longer time to pay back as well. Let me just add that. So here it is again, to fund the long-term economic growth projects. So the developmental projects. And to be honest with you guys, I was looking at the World Bank website, and I'd advise that you guys take a look at it, because even in Jamaica right now, there are a lot of ongoing projects that the World Bank had funded.
So why don't you share that with us?
Yes,
That's
sir.
your
Just
job.
hold on, man. Hold on, sir, man. I just tell them someone and visit the site too. You understand? But I gotta give them a example of what me I talk about. I show them what. All right, so this is just let me see the time. Oh.
Continue speaking and stopwatch time.
Oh, all right, sir. All right, so the World Bank is made up of 5 groups. Right, so there's a chart right here. So you have the International Bank for Reconstruction and Development, that is the IBRD. The International Center for Settlement for Investment Disputes, ICSID. These abbreviations might not seem foreign to you guys, because we might have start seeing them probably on the news or so on and so forth. The International Development Association, IDA, the International Finance Corporation, IFC, the Multilateral Investment Guarantee Agency, right? MIGA. So a lot of these organizations are not very unfamiliar to us. I know you guys must have seen 1 or 2 of these somewhere, probably in the Glean or on the news or somewhere of the sort. All right, so the IFC stimulates the economic development of its members by providing capital for private enterprises, right? So the IFC has targeted its aid towards less developed countries and has been their largest multilateral source of private sector equity, financing, and loans.
Can you move to the point now where you talk a little bit about the role it plays, for example, in the Caribbean and or Jamaica?
I don't think they have a slide, but let's see, but
You mentioned it, you said to visit the website and what they're doing and all of that. So get to that point.
Okay, get to that point. All right, so let's go to that point. This.
Is that a part of the PowerPoint? Are you going to go to the website?
It's live, sir. I'll go straight to the website.
Then stop sharing and then go to the website. That's what you need to do. You need to stop sharing. You need to stop sharing the PowerPoint. Find the website, then you share again. That's how you do it. That's how you see that black screen coming up. Quickly.
Okay.
Are you going to the website, sir?
Yes, sir, but all of a sudden my internet start move slow.
All right, so we're going to pause here. All right, so thank you for the presentation. I will caution everybody, this is not for the persons who just present. Please ensure that you don't go online and find any information and pass it off as your own. This is why I've asked you to not only present, but to write an academic paper, because that will determine your level of involvement in terms of the documentation. In speaking specifically about the presentation, I like the information that is given, although I don't know where the information is coming from because there was no direct quotation. The definition of international organization, however, is very flimsy. You need a far more, let me say, academic definition of international organizations. The scenario that you use at the beginning should have been related to international trade and not to international aviation, because the course is international business. So any example you use must be specific to that. In the presentation, I went into the types of things done by the WTO. Whenever you use video examples, you're supposed to then explain. You don't just play the video and leave the video and you move on. It's not our job to interpret the video. All right. Again, for the World Bank, sources of definition and sources of information. Where's the information coming from? And I was happy that you mentioned about some of the projects that are being done either in the Caribbean and or in Jamaica, because one of the things that I found overall were no specific examples. So you were telling us about the World Trade Organization and what it does, but there was no specific example of where the World Trade Organization, for example, handled a dispute matter. I'm not sure if you ever see police, for example, running up and down running down people who are selling quote unquote knockoffs. That is coming from out of the World Trade Organization, because international countries such as the United States complain about copyright infringement. All right, so in your written paper, you must have specific examples if you want to pass. All right, I'm over the time, so I'm sure you have a class and I have a class as well. So thank you very much for the presentation, and we will continue. We'll wrap up theories next week and start a new topic. Remember, I think it's Ramon, I said that you're supposed to email me your essay before you upload it, and then I will give my track changes in terms of recommendation of how to improve the paper. I suggest the same for Jerome and Shanique as well. Ensure you put your ID numbers on the assignment. So
Sir,
when you're sending it to me, yes?
This paper that you're talking about.
You're not there yet. You're not there yet, Alex. You're way in August.
Oh, okay.
Right. It's as you present, you do your paper. Remember, next week is your mid-semester, and you're doing up to module 4, 20 multiple choice questions. And it's going to be 5 questions per module. So if I were you, I will sit down, go back through the recordings, as well as do some readings and check on Canvas, because I've added information there. Enjoy the rest of your day. Enjoy your weekend, and I'll see you next week, Monday.
One more thing, sir. You never sent me the question, you know.
What question?
The question where you said you write the create a question.
Yes,
Number
I did,
7.
sir. I did,
You
sir. I
did?
sent it to you via email. You need to check it.
Okay.
And it's
All right,
also
all
on
right.
Canvas as well. So even if I don't send it via email, it is on Canvas.
All right.
All right, cool. So have a good evening, everybody.
Yes.
Cool.